Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session on the circular economy and the end of unchecked consumption. So we just have a very short time together, so I'm going to give some brief introductions and then go straight into the questions because I know you want to hear from the panelists. So my name is Julia Attwood, and I lead the Circular Economy Research Team at Bloomberg NEF. And we also have with us Her Excellency Stientje van Veldhoven van der Meer, who has served as the Secretary for Infrastructure and Water Management for the Government of the Netherlands. We also have Ron Gonen, who's the CEO and co-founder of Closed Loop Partners, which is an investment firm that's focused on the circular economy. And we also have Luis Sierra, who's the president and CEO of Nova Chemicals, a plastics and chemicals company based in Canada. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So I want to start by setting the tone. We have been hearing a lot of different things about consumer behavior during COVID, both that a lot more waste is being generated, but also that some of it is being better recycled because people have more time at home to figure out their local systems. So what I want to ask each of the panelists is, do you believe that COVID is a net negative or a net positive for the circular economy? And Stientje, I will go to you first. Actually, maybe we will go to Ron first.
Sorry. Would you like me to go first?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I was thanking you for the question and for inviting me for this important panel, and a great pleasure to be with you. And I think to answer your question directly, we must make it a net positive. And I think we have a lot of options for doing just that. In a lot of countries around the world, we are facing, of course, this incredible crisis. And the Netherlands is also coping with a severe form of lockdown at the moment. So people are more at home. You would expect to have more waste at home. But if we look at a study conducted by the University of Wageningen on food waste behavior by Dutch consumers, it shows that the majority of Dutch consumers indicated to have equal amounts, for example, of food waste during and before the lockdown. So they are trying to, let's say, to not make it worse. So it's difficult to see at this moment how consumer behavior regarding waste is affecting the circular economy. It is such a broad topic, but what we do know, of course, is that the COVID-19 crisis will certainly lead to major economic challenges all around the world. And therefore we have a choice. And that is what I meant to say we need to make this a net positive. Yeah. I think the COVID has highlighted many of the vulnerabilities in our economies. And so we have to start building back better. And I think we'll be discussing a lot more about this. But I think that COVID has shown that the pace and scale of workplace innovation, to name one consequence, is huge. You see the digitalization, the way that people start to change their behaviors in the context of this crisis. It also shows what can be done. And I think we also need to use all of this movement to build back better.
Absolutely. And Ron, what are your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. And I'll give one example of the United States, and I think this is the same globally, where moving to a circular economy can literally save lives. One of the things that we realized when, with the onset of COVID, was hospitals had a lot of protective equipment, but their traditional operating standard was you use a piece of protective equipment once, and then you discard it. And then maybe at the end of the quarter or the end of the year, you just repurchase more protective equipment for the coming year. And that's the way we've operated for decades. And a lot of money was spent buying new protective equipment every year, and a lot of money was spent throwing away the protective equipment every year after it was used. All of a sudden you have a pandemic where demand is far outstripping supply for protective equipment, and supply chains can't ramp up fast enough to meet demand. When you have that type of scenario, you literally have people dying because of this linear system that we've been using. And one major advancement that a number of hospitals began to adopt is, how do you sanitize protective equipment on site? And if you're able to do that, number one, you're going to save a lot of lives because you're going to have access to that protective equipment, but you're also going to save a lot of money because now you're not constantly purchasing new equipment and constantly paying to get rid of it after one use. And that's just one example of how I think COVID has highlighted the opportunities with transition to a circular economy.
That's a fantastic and very pertinent example. Thank you for sharing that with us. And Louis, what about the supply chain? What are things looking like for you?
Well, what I'd say is, build on the comments that both panelists have already said. What it's done is it's proven how important plastic is to us in society. It's critical. So all the masks you see that people are wearing, the garments, are made of plastic and are very important. And you don't have an easy or replacement that is as good as what we're doing here with plastic. So it does reinforce the virtue that the material has. The problem is the waste, and I don't think anybody, I can speak on behalf of myself and my company, and certainly my industry, nobody is happy about the waste element of it. Ron said it really, really well. So I think it, in essence, I think it is, there's a reason why our industry was categorized as an essential business, because it is, and it's a vital business, and one that needs to kind of figure this problem out, and we're putting a lot of energy on it. The other thing I want to say, it's not a direct answer to this question, but I want to take a minute to say it, is that we didn't let up. So the COVID actually slowed a lot of things down and made things more difficult and all that, but we accelerated our move into the circular economy. We made two big announcements last year on recovering plastic and bringing it back in and reprocessing it. We're delighted to be working with the biggest plastics recycler in Canada, a company called Merlin Plastics on the west coast of Canada. And we will, once that is fully up and running, and it'll start this year, this is not about stuff that comes later, we will be roughly balanced between how much plastic, fresh plastic, we send to British Columbia and how much we get back. So I can't think of anything more of a perfect example of circularity than just that. A plastics maker buying plastic.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful example. So you've done an amazing job of setting the scene. Thank you, everyone. So I want to dig into the details a little bit now. And Ron, I'm going to go to you first because, as Stientje mentioned, there are a lot of policymakers talking about building back better and about wanting to use their stimulus funding for sustainability. How do you think recycling in the circular economy fits into that? Are there job upsides? Are these projects shovel ready?
Well, the recycling industry, which is a core part of the circular economy, is a major job creator in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. And so the more that we can build recycling infrastructure, and that stretches from collection to recycling facilities that sort and bale material, all the way to converters that take that material and turn it into pellets if it's plastic, or pulp if it's paper, to then be used for manufacturing. So that's the biggest opportunity, I think, from an economic standpoint, is the sheer job creation that can be produced when you're reusing and recycling material as opposed to just throwing it in a landfill. The other major economic opportunity is landfills are expensive. There's billions and billions of dollars spent annually of taxpayer money to take commodities that there's markets for, that unfortunately these billions of dollars of taxpayers is used to just dispose of it in a hole. And so transitioning to a circular economy has the opportunity to create jobs and avoid the landfill disposal fees that are crippling a lot of municipal budgets.
That definitely sounds like a sweet spot for policymakers, for sure. Upside on all sides. So building on that, it's clear that in any green transition, policy has a really huge role. And Stientje, if I can come to you with this next question, do you feel that policy should be more focused towards consumers with, say, an aggressive pay-as-you-throw tax, or is it better oriented more towards companies with, say, recycled content mandates?
Well, both. And let me pick up on 2 points that the previous speakers made, because they were too important to let go. Indeed, sanitation, I think, has been one of the great revelations also of the past crisis period. In the Netherlands have also been stimulating innovation, stimulating, for example, sanitation of sterilization of facial masks in the beginning of the crisis. So I think this is one part where the circular economy is about more than just recycling. It's also reuse. It's also about avoiding use and designing for reuse and recycling. So let's say, contract the discussion to recycling only. It really is about a different economy. And that's why I really liked your comment, Ron, on basically you're saying our economy is still very inefficient, and that is good news because we've got lots to gain and there's big business opportunities there. And waste is a human invention. Nature doesn't know waste. In nature, everything is a resource. And we have started to create waste, and waste is literally a waste. You could do so much better if you start to avoid creating waste and if you start treating it as resources. So what do we need? Because that basically was what your question is about. What do we need in policies? Of course, we should have policies directed at stimulating innovation in companies, bringing the entire circle together, because none of these companies can do it alone. If you need to restructure your economy, then you need all of those partners working together. And these are partners that previously had nothing to do with each other. In the Netherlands, we have been working on the Plastic Pact, which involved bringing Coca-Cola together with a waste company. Well, when did they ever have to do something together? Now they do. And that's exactly, I think, what we're hearing from Canada too. And I think we should not forget the role of public and private procurement. So we need public and private procurement creating and driving markets. We need policies that stimulate companies that start to work in that circular economy. And we also need to make it practical and easy for consumers because they are very willing to go there if we make it practical and easy and attractive for them. And so we need policies doing and pushing the borders on all of these three issues.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it leads very nicely into my question for you, Louis, which is that the circular economy really demands a lot from chemicals and materials companies, and everyone is expecting to be able to have more sustainable material with the same performance and the same cost. Is that reasonable? Are they asking for miracles? Where are the trade-offs?
So I think, so it is a challenge, I'd say that. I wouldn't call it a miracle, but what we have, and you have to understand in the tech, in the chemical industry, we are technology companies. We spend a significant amount of our time and money and effort in research and in finding ways to be novel in how we formulate plastics and how we make them easier and simpler to recycle. So, but that whole trade-off between usability or performance, the cost to make it, and then the price as well of what it sells for, all three of those things have to come together. You have to have a product that can be used. You have to be able to produce it at a reasonable cost. And then the price element is very important. And that's one thing. I've been in this industry for a long time. And recycling is not new. It's not new at all. And you go back to the 1980s, it started in the early 1980s on recycling plastic. So it's not a new and novel thing. What we need to do now, though, is to make all those elements that you mentioned work. The reason it kind of comes and goes is because one of those isn't there. Either the cost is too high or the price isn't high enough or all those things, or the performance is inappropriate or insufficient, and the brands and the consumer wants more. So all of those three things have to work in unison. But I'm very optimistic and heartened that all of us, and I know again I speak for the industry, we're all working in that direction. We're trying to figure this out.
Absolutely. And I think the need for collaboration has really come through in everything that each of you has been saying. So then my next question is really about not just the supply chain as we think of it physically, but this ecosystem of government and investors and the people in the industry. So Stientje, if I come to you, when you're making your wish list, I mean, what would you like to ask from the private sector, from companies, to make your job as a policymaker in this area easier?
Well, I have two items on my wish list. And the first one is, let's make clear what the urgency is. Because circular economy is not a nice to do thing. It is a need to do solution to major problems that we otherwise have. If you look at climate change, there's no way that we are going to tackle climate change fast enough if we do not use the solutions for reducing CO2 emissions that the circular economy provides. It is a tool that can help us to bring down CO2 emissions and tackle climate change. And then the next, if you look at the world population growing to 10 billion, and if all of those people are going to be, on average, more wealthy than they are now, let's hope so. Let's work for that. But that means they're all going to buy more stuff, and we're going to need the resources to be able to supply that. So we need to keep those valuable resources in the loop. So let's create the urgency. Let's show that this is a need to do agenda, and then let's start working jointly on this need to do agenda. We need to come together, work with governments. I am very, very much willing to work with companies worldwide. We started in the Netherlands with with the Dutch plastic pact. We've enlarged this to European plastic pacts, plastic being indeed one of the sectors that are really pushing for this agenda, that have really seen the need and the necessity and the opportunities. And I think we need to work together. You need me, you need government to set standards, to set policies, to give incentives, to reward you for reducing CO2. We need the technologies that you have, the production facilities that you can supply, and the attractive products that you can produce. And then we need to work with all of the other partners in these sectors, the waste collectors, the innovation, the consumers. We need to come together. That's my second element on the wish list. Come together and make it work, speed up and scale up. We have no time to lose, and there's many opportunities to gain. So let's get to work.
That's fantastic. I don't know how anyone could say no to that. But Ron, what could policymakers then on the other side of things do for investors trying to do more in the circular economy?
For investors, I think creating incentives to invest in certain markets would be very helpful. So in the US, we have a form of tax credit system that encourages investment. But I wanted to bring up something related that I think has been part of this conversation so far. We do have a challenge in terms of the way commodities and products are priced in our system. So for instance, you can manufacture using a commodity like a styrofoam, let's say, that's not recyclable. Right now, the taxpayer has to pay to dispose of it. You can use something like aluminum that's extremely valuable in the recycling and circular economy space, and that brand or producer sees no financial benefit from doing that. And so policymakers need to understand and incorporate the economics of the system and say, brand owner, if you're going to use a commodity that's not recyclable and the taxpayer is going to have to pay to dispose of it, there's going to be a penalty there because we're no longer going to incur that cost. But hey, brand over here, if you're going to use something like PET or HDPE or aluminum that's highly recyclable and valuable and actually generates revenue, we're going to reward you for that. And getting policymakers involved in the actual economics of how commodities are treated throughout the system would make a big difference.
Absolutely. Having the data from all of those operations is just so critical to all of the decisions that both sides have to make. So then, Louis, I'll go to you. What are you really looking for from policymakers?
So what I'd say to that, I'll answer that question second. First thing I want to say is the future is right now. What we're talking about here is happening as we speak. This is not a moonshot and we're all going together and all landing on the moon at the same time. This is evident, and I just use an example. The system that they've set up in British Columbia is quite advanced. I'm very familiar, having worked quite a bit in Europe and had a plant in Belgium, not too far from our friends here in the Netherlands. So very familiar with the sophistication and the advancement in Europe on trying to get this material to be economically recycled. So if anybody's listening and doesn't know much about this topic, it's what we need to do is scale this. It's happening now. It can happen now. We have to do more of it. So let me get to that problem on scale. And this is where I think all the other comments are excellent, but with policymakers is that, and I'll speak for primarily the US, but certainly for Canada as well. It's so fragmented. It is so unbelievably fragmented. In the United States, there's 26,000 different separate municipal or local or city trash collection entities, and getting those 26,000 cats to all go in the same direction is very, very, very difficult. And so one of the things that we do in industry is trying to find ways to kind of get through that system and try to pull the one cat we really know can get through and get it going so that we get more to follow. But that fragmentation is an issue. And back to Ron's point, and Ron, I know Ron's fund, and he's done remarkably good work. He's done that as well. That if you do this right and you kind of set the ingredients right, it's like a self-sustaining reaction. It'll go forward. And so that's what gives me a high degree of optimism in what we've got in front of us.
That's really good to hear. And I think it's a great point about how we have so much of the technology now. It's just about pushing it forward. So we're looking at about the last 5 minutes of our panel. And so what I really wanted to ask you all to do was to give some advice to your peers about how to be successful in the circular economy. So Louis, if I stick with you, what is it that chemicals companies should be doing right away?
Well, I think they are. They're taking this seriously. This is not something that I came out of a big multinational oil company, and I could say that in the past they tried to kind of deny what was going on with the climate change issue. I don't see that in the chemical industry today. I mean, if it's happening, I don't know of it. And I sit on all the committees and all the different CEOs around the world. We're all taking this very, very seriously. So what I would just say is that it's in our benefit to all of us figure out how we can collaborate, where we can collaborate to find places to make this work. There's a bit of a all of the above situation here where it's not one answer, but it's a bouquet of answers. And for each company, it might be a little different, but just that point of collaborating and helping with the innovation part is critical.
Absolutely. And Ron, what do you think your community should be doing and looking for?
I'll go back to the example I started with regarding protective equipment in hospitals and the amount that was purchased and then thrown out and purchased and then thrown out. And then we had this mismatch between demand and supply. I would encourage everybody to constantly ask why. Why is this system in place? Why are we following this operation? Constantly ask why, because we have a tendency to think that the systems that we're operating under were somehow anointed as the optimal system or had been the systems that have been in place for decades. And oftentimes when you study supply chains and the history of supply chains, you realize that they were oftentimes kind of a mismatch of different operations and systems that were put together over many years for different reasons at different times. And no one's really sure why they're actually structured that way now. The one thing everyone's sure of is they're massively inefficient. And so if you continue to ask, why is this system in place? Why are we following this type of supply chain? You'll begin to get answers about how to optimize those supply chains and those systems. And that's where you'll find great investment opportunities.
That's fantastic advice. And Stientje, I'm going to let you have the last word. What advice can you give about corralling all of the stakeholders who have a voice in circular economy policy?
Well, the first one I would say is change the incentives. And I think great example that Louis gave about the cats. How do you get 40,000 cats running in the same direction? Make sure the food smells really nice. So if in the Netherlands, we gave a financial incentive that creates a difference of 40% in the price you pay if you put a packaging on the market which is easily recyclable or non-recyclable, and we've abolished some packaging materials. So be clear to the market, but also change the incentives. Make it worth your while to go to those materials that are easier to reuse in a. And my second point is team up. If you are one company that produces mattresses, you cannot afford to build a factory to recycle them. If you team up with all of the companies in one country, we've done this in the Netherlands, they have jointly built a new industry recycling all of the mattresses which are being used in the Netherlands. And that is a distance between the Netherlands and Moscow every year in mattresses in the Netherlands alone. All of this giant mountain of resources now being recycled jointly. So from waste, which was cost, they went to new jobs in a new company that reuses those materials and makes a circular economy. If you team up, you can do that. No company can do it alone. No country can do it alone. We should team up, and let's start with the coalition of the willing. Not everybody's going to be able to move at the same time, but there are lots of companies that want to move with you. And I think PACE, the partnership for accelerating the circular economy, is a very good example. So if you want to team up, join PACE, join other front runners in the circular economy, whether you're a company, whether you're a government, whether you're an NGO, if you want to work on this, this is the place where we can join forces, where we can show what can be done. The Netherlands will host a virtual conference of the WEEF plus climate on the 15th of April to discuss the link between circular economy and climate change. So if you want to team up in combating climate change through using that very effective instrument of the circular economy, also meet us there.
Well, thank you so much. That's a wonderful, optimistic tone to end on. Thank you to all of the panelists for your advice, for your thoughts, for your experience. It's been a wonderful session. So I'll just say thank you to the audience for sticking with us, and happy Sustainability Week.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.